I'm delighted to be here again, and I want to thank all of you, and I want to especially thank the 5G group they didn't exist last time I spoke here, so I'm very pleased to see that development. I'm going to talk with you about what we know now about 5G, wireless radiation and health, and what we can do now. I want to dedicate this talk to two very special women, Maria Auguste, who died at age 30, and Callie Pavano, who's struggling now with a very grave illness. I want to thank them for their courage, and I will explain who they are in more detail in a moment. You've heard about my credentials. I guess the only point to tell you is this. I've spent more than 40 years of my life working in public health. I've worked with the World Health Organization, I've worked with the US government, I've worked with the French government, the Israeli government, and I never imagined I'd spend this much time talking on this issue because I thought it was pretty straightforward. But as Steve just mentioned in his introduction, when I was a young scientist at the National Academy of Sciences, I was involved in the question of, is it dangerous to expose children to tobacco smoke? Believe it or not, that was a question in the 1980s. And some of you may be, like me, old enough to remember when there was smoking on airplanes. It was a pretty stinking experience to fly any long flight. And we were able to show that over a very short flight, the so-called non-smoking section had as much fine particulate air pollution in it as the smoking section. But even though we showed that, it took years before actions were taken to ultimately get rid of smoking on airplanes. Now, I would suggest that where we are now with 5G and wireless radiation is unfortunately in the same place. We have the science. I'm going to share it with you today. We have even more science now than we may have had on tobacco. And we know that a lot of the negative studies we have, and there are a lot of negative studies, are biased because they're not really studying what we're going to be exposed to. And those few studies that do use a pulsed signal, that do appropriately study the technology, whether 3G, 4G, or 5G, they find consistent evidence of damage, some of which I'm going to show you today. Now, I've written a couple books. They're available on Amazon, Secret History of the War on Cancer, and the one, Disconnect, the Truth About Cell Phone Radiation. The type of evidence that you can rely on for understanding effects on humans is really these three major types of studies. There's exposure and modeling studies that I'll show you briefly, where we use computers to estimate exposure. There's experiments on animals and cell cultures, and I want to stress something about the experiments on animals, okay? We study animals, we study drugs in order to predict harm in humans and prevent it. Every compound that we know for sure causes cancer in people will produce it in animals when adequately studied. That's why we have an FDA when it comes to drugs. But the FDA is missing in action when it comes to wireless radiation. They are not doing their job of an adequate survey of the scientific literature, and I will make that clear. Toxicology and animal studies are used to predict and prevent harm. Epidemiologic studies, which I also am an epidemiologist, and clinical observations only tell you about damage that has already happened. They confirm the past. So you should never require proof of human harm before taking steps to prevent it. We should pay more attention to animal studies. And now I want to show you some very disturbing patterns that have happened. This is a report from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Have any of you ever seen it or heard of it? This report was done of over 40 million of their clients, just to look at the question of what is the health of younger Americans, so-called millennials. And they reported unprecedented deterioration in their health. They found these changes in a number of major conditions, behavioral conditions, cardiovascular conditions, endocrine conditions. A 21% increase in certain types of serious chronic disease, cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease, an unexplained increase in atrial fibrillation in young people who were constantly carrying devices close to their body. Cancer rates in Gen X are much higher today than they were in the same generation in the 1990s. Rectal cancer. Has anyone here know of someone with rectal cancer who's in their 40s, 30s? 14, age 14, and without a family history? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear that. And the thing is that doctors don't even suspect the possibility of cancer in such a young person like that. And we are seeing more and more cases. And each one is a tragedy. The fact that they make up statistics like this is an indictment of a failure of the public health system. Now, I cannot prove what is behind these trends. I cannot prove it. But what else has changed so rapidly since the 1990s? What else has changed? That's what we have to ask ourselves when we see this kind of trend. We have to look at these trends. We have to understand what's going on. And now I want to share with you what Callie Pavano has to say about this.
My story is that I was diagnosed with a stage 3 tumor in my left leg. After much research, I learned that it very likely was caused by my laptop, which I kept on my left leg for hours upon hours at a time. It affected me in many ways as a runner. And then as a result of the information that I found, I learned that it is not only the laptops, it is the mobile devices. And my mission is to create awareness so that this doesn't happen to anyone ever again. But it's simple. It's just about being smart. It's just about being smart. Don't put your phone in your bra. I put it on, if I'm going to use my cell phone, I put it on speakerphone. Are there times where you can't hear it? Yeah, of course. And of course, there are times, of course, I use it the way you're not supposed to, up against your head. But it's not that hard. If I know that, as I said, if I'm going to wear it in my armband, you know, if I'm at the gym, I put it in airplane mode. It's simple. Airplane mode. It's that easy. Or turn it off. So it's really not that hard. It's just a slide of the device. And if people don't believe me, all they have to do is they can look at the legal disclaimer, which is online for their cell phone. It's fairly easy to find this information. Well, no, I'm sorry. It's not that easy. It's pretty elusive, actually. I apologize. I take that back. It's not easy to find this information. I had to dig deep. I had to dig really deep and really scroll through all of the information in the owner's manual for my laptop, where I found on page 11, keep this 8 inches away from your body. So if absolutely nothing else, that parents will protect their children. That is my goal. I do not want children to be exposed to this. They trust us, they rely on us. So my goal is that whether it's in life or death, that my story will inspire others to spread the word and not be afraid that people are going to think they're crazy. My goal is that even after I'm gone, I want people to know my story. I want people to know Susie's story too, because I promised her I'd keep it going. Never give up, never ever give up, never back down. And, you know, as I said early on, my motto is I won't back down, and that applies in many ways. I'm not backing down to this cancer. I'm not giving up yet, but it's also I will not back down in regard to spreading this word.
Well, unfortunately, she's quite ill right now. We're always hopeful because that remains the most important drug for any cancer patient. But we know that cancer rates now have this unexplained increase in millennials and in younger and younger people. We know because Kelly has experienced it as she's in proof of the statistics. And now another grim statistic that you may be familiar with. 25 states had suicide rate increases of more than 30% since the beginning of this decade. The turn of the century, the turn of the 21st century has been greeted by the largest increase in suicide that we've recorded outside of the Depression, the Great Depression in the United States. Now, there are many, many factors that go into suicide, many. But one of them, unfortunately, for some people, has become that they have given up on life because they are electrosensitive. And I want to share a picture with you of Maria Auguste, 30 years old, just barely. And she says when she first became sick due to electromagnetic fields, she was shocked. She had no idea such an illness had increased. She didn't know. It snowballed. And then, ironically, she became housebound as there was no safe place for her to go. So we are grateful to her for having left Environmental Health Trust a small bequest, but we earnestly wish that that had not happened, for her sake, for the sake of her family as well. As we just heard from the audience member who shared with us the loss of a 14-year-old from rectal cancer, the CDC has also documented that this century has seen a phenomenal growth in pediatric cancer, increased rates of brain and liver cancer, as well as rectal in these young people. Now, let me be clear. I can't tell you what explains these. Obesity, inactivity, bad food, we know all of those things are relevant. All we have here is a trend, but these trends call out for explanation. Now, what do we know about electromagnetic fields? All electromagnetic fields are biologically active. You can see here, they run from the low frequency that turns on all the lights in this room up to the higher frequencies of non-ionizing radiation that allow television, cell phones, and Wi-Fi. And 5G is going to be at the top end of that in terms of frequency. Frequency is how fast it goes a second. So this is the lights in the room. This is the cell phone. It's 2.4 billion cycles a second. 5G will be 5 billion to 100 billion cycles a second. That's the frequency. The power of 5G is much less, but we're not concerned so much with power in this for its biological effect. We're concerned with pulse. Repeated pulse exposure is what we are most concerned about, which we believe links the damaging effects on DNA from cell phone radiation and X-rays. That is to say, they are different frequencies. X-rays we know are very damaging. Non-ionizing radiation of the phone we used to think might be less damaging. We now know that that's wrong. The French have taken steps. They have recalled millions of phones in France that have been found not to be adequate, and they are issuing advice. They have banned the use of cell phones by anyone in schools right now up to age 16. I know that a lot of children who have phones will be horrified at that idea, but in fact, I think parents need to take back their power and only give phones to children for emergency purposes only. Our children need to know how to use computers and phones so they can be digital citizens, but they need to understand it's a two-way microwave radio and should never be kept close to the body for any length of time unless it's on airplane mode or off. Now, just to give you some idea of what we understand about toxic agents and why it's so important to protect our children, try with me saying, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Let's do it. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Now faster. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Now really fast. Peter Piper picked a peck. The point is, the faster that cells grow, like in a child's brain, in a child's body, the greater the chance a mistake will be made. The faster you drive, the shorter time you have to correct a mistake. Speed kills, and speed for cell growth is in fact problematic. So that's why we take great steps to protect our children. We have seat belts and special seats for them in cars and bike helmets and ski helmets. We take a lot of effort to protect the brain of a child, do we not? But we're not protecting them now. We are, some of us unknowingly, exposing them to microwave radiation with increasing number of devices, all of which cross the membranes in the cells and can compromise DNA by passing through the membrane. That's the thing that links toxic materials. Toxic materials can cross the membrane of our cells that is supposed to protect us, and that's how they get in. They can get into the mitochondria or other organelles inside the cell cytoplasm and can cause damage. Now, another fast-moving part of humans is sperm. It takes at least 250,000 sperm to make a healthy baby. Some people have asked, why does it take so many? And the answer is that sperm do not know how to ask for directions. But the real answer is that you want the healthiest, strongest sperm to survive and to fertilize the egg. That's what you want. All over the world, since the industrial era began, there has been a decline in sperm count. Men today are estimated to be half the men their grandfathers were in terms of their testosterone levels, all over the world. There are many different things that cause this. Pesticides, organic chemicals, volatile solvents, radiation, tight underwear, hot tubs, and cell phone radiation. All can contribute to damaging sperm. And again, it's fast developing and therefore more vulnerable. There are some controlled experiments with human sperm, and I'm just going to show you a few right now. They've taken healthy sperm from healthy men and put them in a test tube. Of course, they're going to die eventually. And then they've had other sperm that they do nothing with, but the ones in the test tube get exposed to cell phone radiation. And here's what we find. This is studies done by a professor in Australia who is quite highly regarded and is associate chancellor of his university now there. You can see on the black bar on the top, the exposed sperm have about 1/3 as many vital sperm as the controls, right? The controls are the white bar, and there's so many more of them, and the exposed, there's about 1/3 as many. On the bottom cell, you have a measure of damage to the DNA, and there you see the opposite results. The exposed sperm, 30%, 25% have DNA damage, whereas the control sperm, a small amount, has DNA damage. Because being alive damages our DNA. Breathing, sunlight, oxygen, they'll all damage DNA. And if you eat some of the wonderful foods being shown here, and you exercise and breathe and do your yoga, And that noise reminds me to please turn your phones on airplane mode now or off for the courtesy of those who are trying to listen, as well as for those who want to avoid exposure. What we know from this study is that sperm is damaged by cell phone radiation. This may be what happened to Callie, although she's a woman. Here is a measure of damage to the DNA on sperm from just having a laptop right over the Petri dishes that made no heat. So they controlled for the heat. This is just the wireless radiation. And they showed that there was damage to the DNA with respect to exposure to the radiation from a laptop. Laptops aren't called laptops anymore. They're called tablets. They belong on tables. They do not belong on the bodies of young children except on airplane mode for short periods of time. If you must download a movie or something to give to a child because you're on a long car trip or something, please download it first and then put it on airplane mode so the child can observe it. You'll save your battery and you'll spare your child or yourself the exposures to microwave radiation. There's even evidence that cell phone radiation can interfere with libido. For men and women, by the way. We know that tobacco smoke does interfere with libido, but there's no question that a lot of young people today, they're having less sex. We don't know why. This might be one of the explanations. What we do know from studies that I've done with my colleagues in Turkey, as well as in Brazil, is that cell phone radiation can damage the testis. And these pictures here on the left is the controls, shows you healthy cells with that nice membrane intact. That's what that white border shows you. And then on the right side of the screen, you see what happens after exposure to cell phone radiation, which is why the Cleveland Clinic has advised it's best to keep your phone as far from the testis as you can. Melatonin and omega-3 fatty acids, interestingly, can protect from the damage from EMF. You see the control cells on the far left. You see on the top right, you see EMF exposed, and again, you see more white between them. But if you combine the EMF with either melatonin or omega-3 fatty acids, you get less damage. Now, that doesn't mean that you can repair it totally, but here's what it's important for you to understand. No matter how much exposure you may have had already to phone radiation, you can take steps through healthy diet and exercise that will protect you from whatever damage might have taken place. And you can start immediately now to do some of the things I'm going to tell you today. Now, these images come from work that we've done in Brazil. And again, watch the radiation into the head of the child. And you'll see here that as the head turns, the radiation goes all the way through the eyes and really exposes the entire head to this radiation. The yellow and white is the highest exposure, but red is also significant, as you can see from the bar on the left. So if you put a phone next to a child's head, because the skull is thinner and it contains more fluid, they're going to get more exposure. Watch the little girl's face. I think if parents around the world saw this, they would stop giving children their phones. Again, use it on speakerphone. Use it with a headset that's wired. But do not give it to children as a toy. This is what happens to a millennial-aged adult after 50 minutes of holding a phone next to the head. This is a study done at the NIH. The person did not know. They were hooked up to a headset. On both sides, there were phones. They did not know if the phone was turned on or not. They didn't know. There's no sound, just invisible microwave radiation. And what they found was that in that part of the brain, seen in the top left slide, the red areas, that's sugar. That's glucose in the brain. Now think about it. Dementia has been called diabetes of the brain because people with dementia have excessive levels of glucose in their brains. We don't know the long-term consequences of this exposure, but we certainly ought to take precautions to prevent it. What we do know in children is that teenagers whose phone records were used for this study, 7th to 9th graders, had a reduction in figural memory, in their ability to remember images and figures. Significant decrease in memory. After just 1 year, those kids that used the phones the most had a reduction in their memory. We also have studies looking at the blood of people who have lived near to mobile phone base stations. And this study found in the blood of these people who live near the base stations different chemicals, glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase, which are markers of DNA damage, which indicate increased risks of cancer. That's what has been found in this study. People who lived closer to phone towers, 80 meters, had significantly more damage than those who lived 300 meters, more than 1,000 feet away. Looking at their blood. And these towers operated at levels that are 1/10 those that have been allowed in the United States. Now, there's a new study on phones that's just come out of Yale University. And they found, looking at 900 cases of thyroid cancer, that people who had a certain genetic polymorphism, called a SNP, were significantly more likely to develop thyroid cancer. The thyroid, of course, regulates metabolism. Cell phone users who had more of specific SNPs in their genes were twice as likely to develop cancer. Now, that's an important result. Now, the French, as I said, are more advanced than us in many ways. What they did in 2015, the government actually tested phones. We've never done that here in the United States. That's one of the things that has to change. The government had independent testing of more than 400 phones that they purchased off the shelf. In the United States, industry can provide whatever phone they want for testing. Think about it. They get to cherry pick it. What they found is that 9 out of 10 phones exceeded the European limits. And here's the iPhone 5, which of course doesn't exist very much anymore. And when they measured the iPhone 5 radiation at body contact, indicated by the red there, look at what they found. Body contact. It exceeded the standard, which is the yellow. It exceeded the standard by 3 times. And if you apply the US standard, which by the way, on paper, is more stringent than the French, it would exceed our standard by 6-fold. 6-fold. That may explain why we're seeing so many unknown phenomena in our young people today. And here's an example of what the Canadians did.
This is a special edition of Marketplace.
Most of us carry our phones next to our body. And why wouldn't we?
Science, tests, and the hidden message in your cell phone.
So the tests are all done.
Tests are all finished.
And
The number exceeded the limit. It went up significantly with each one of the phones.
That's right. The phones exceeded the safety limit when they were moved right against the body. The radiation absorbed increased 3 to 4 times.
Those results were carried out by the Canadian Broadcast Corporation 3 years ago. The US government ignored them. That was a 6-figure investigation. Recently, the Chicago Tribune tried to replicate it. This is what they found.
Still, we at the Chicago Tribune wondered, how much radiation exposure do phones really cause? We bought more than a dozen phones and had them tested by an accredited lab using standard procedures. To test each one, the lab owner used a special mixture of fluids that mimics the electrical properties of the body. He poured that into a fiberglass tub. Then he secured a phone underneath the tub and set it to operate at full power. A robotic arm dipped up and down in the fluid, measuring the amount of radiation it was absorbing. There were two main things we wanted to know. First, would the phones meet the safety limit if tested at the same distance from the body as the manufacturer's own testing? It turned out that some phones exceeded the limit. Next, we noticed that federal rules allow phone manufacturers to test phones up to 25 millimeters away from a simulated body. That's nearly an inch. The rules reflect times when many people carried their phones in belt clips or even holsters, not that close to the body. So our second question was, what if phones were tested at a smaller distance to reflect how people carry their phones today, like in a pocket? This is crucial. Typically, the farther away a phone is away from simulated tissue, the less exposure to radiation. So we moved the phones in closer to 2 millimeters, or less than 1/10 of an inch. At this distance, radiation exposure often exceeded the safety standard.
It exceeded it in the Chicago Tribune tests, sometimes as much as 5-fold. They took the 3 most popular phones to test. They published these results. The FCC said it would look into it. Well, they did. And you know what they did? This is absolutely outrageous. They tested phones with their old system, allowing the phone to be tested like it was in a holster, up to 1 inch off the body. And they said, they're fine. Well, of course they're fine. Every millimeter off the body gives you 15% less exposure. I mean, this is an astonishing arrogance on the part of the agency. It takes the American public to be a fool, which of course there's a lot of precedent for lately. But I'm hoping that those of you who are listening to this will join us at Environmental Health Trust and stand up to the FCC and say enough. Pay attention to the science. Wake up like the French government has. Wake up like the Indian government has. At least let us have information so we can make informed choices. If people want to expose their children to microwave radiation going through their brain, I guess they should have the right to do that, although I think it's a kind of child abuse, frankly. And I hope that by sharing this information here today with Hippocrates and others, the real truth about health will become known more broadly. This is but one of the reasons why the American Academy of Pediatrics has been warning about what we need to do. The 5G table will have my materials. I want you to please go over there, sign up to work with them, log in to check to our website when you get home to your wired connection, and take as many cards as you can give away and make sure they get recycled. They are to be passed on, not tossed away. Here's one, here's another. And on the back of these cards is information about why it's important to practice safe phone. Give them to your children. Here are some other resources that we have available for you, including questions about Wi-Fi in schools. A number of schools in this country are now removing Wi-Fi or limiting its exposure. It's a slow but steady increase. How many of you know schools that are reducing their exposure to Wi-Fi? Well, we have to make some headway in Long Island, and Doug and Patty Wood with Grassroots Environmental Education will be happy to help you. That's Grassroots Environmental Education. They are leading the effort for a number of schools. They're working with teachers, unions, and others to promote awareness of this. We're also working with them on the Baby Safe project to promote awareness of the need to reduce radiation exposure during pregnancy. Have you noticed those ads of a pregnant woman with an iPad on her belly? Dreadful. absolutely dreadful, and violating everything we know about exposures that need to take place in pregnancy. Baby Safe Project was developed with leaders in obstetrics and gynecology, like Professor Hugh Taylor, chief of OBGYN at Yale. And it has information about ways to reduce your exposure and why and how to reduce your exposure. Now, global policy developments are a fast-moving train. All politics ultimately are local, but I want to stress, the FCC has passed a law recently, so you at the local level technically have no control over whether or not an antenna could be pasted to your bedroom wall outside. However, over 100 cities have joined in a lawsuit to object to this. And again, we at Environmental Health Trust are raising funds now to develop a major legal challenge, because it's expensive to do that, to the FCC, which currently could, working with the companies, put an antenna wherever they would like. However, there are many different things you can do to slow this down, and we're working hard to make that happen and to reverse and remand and vacate the FCC's decision, which they recently issued, that there would be no revision in their 23-year-old safety standards for testing phones, nor would there be any change to accommodate 5G, a technology that did not even exist when the standards were first developed 23 years ago. We are moving fast, but that doesn't mean we're moving right, and we need to change that. Here's what Berkeley did, and I invite every local town council person here to take notice. This is the legal requirement. It was passed in 2015. It was challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court. We were represented by Professor Lawrence Lessig of Harvard Law School, and they were represented by the lead attorney for the tobacco industry. I'm not making that up. And he lost. And so it's legal to require this notice wherever cell phones are sold. It must be posted. If you carry or use a phone in a pants or shirt pocket or tucked into a bra, when the phone is on and connected to a wireless network, you can exceed the federal guidelines for exposure to RF radiation. That is the law in Berkeley. And we would invite you to have a similar law developed in any of your town councils. This is what the French did, and by the way, this was from 2008, before the International Agency for Research on Cancer. This is what is being done in Cyprus. Cyprus, the translation from the Greek. Don't irradiate me. Learn how to protect me. This is a national campaign on children's health in Cyprus. Now, 5G. I don't expect you to be able to get this slide in great detail, but it's a very important concept I want to share with you. And that is the growth in digital technology is an energy hog, an energy vampire. And it is illusion to argue that smart technology is going to reduce the demand for energy. Because the more new devices you need, like the wireless baby diaper and the wireless vaginal speaker to play music to your child, and your ability to tell your coffee pot to talk to your clothes dryer, and your lighting, and your heating in your home. These are all creating needs for new energy. And the growth in demand for energy that is being created with smart technology is outpacing any gain in efficiency that might come with it. It's very important for you to understand that. And there's a strong growth in digital energy consumption, and it has led these researchers to warn about the fact that information and communications technology are going to be outpacing any gain in efficiency. One of the materials that will be over on the 5G table is this just developed handout about 5G, your health, and the environment. And it includes in it information about what is 5G, about the fact that there are no instruments for measuring it. You can't measure it. So if you can't measure it, how can we justify putting it out there? How can we justify that the industry can use utility poles that we've paid for with public funds and telephone poles and other things to put their devices on it, and then they will charge us to use those devices if we've gone out and bought new routers, new phones, and new technology that need to use 5G. Let me tell you a little secret. 5G phone will be using 4G for voice. That's what we already have. The 5G system is not critical to autonomous vehicles to operate because, of course, 5G only goes a short distance. They will also rely on 4G LTE. It's just in order for the front wheels to communicate with the back wheels of your car, sending wireless radiation through you to do it, 5G is more helpful. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors here. And there is a lot of concern worldwide. I'm one of 240 scientists who've asked the United Nations for a moratorium on 5G because we lack safety data. We lack adequate data, and we do have some, which is on our website at Environmental Health Trust and indicated in here, that shows that the 5G frequency can accelerate the growth of bad cells, whether they're bacteria or cancer cells. And you can see on the graph the projected growth in energy here that will come about if we continue on the current path, which I'm hoping that through talks like this, to all of you here and to all of you out there who are listening and will continue to listen to this, please get involved. Please help us at Environmental Health Trust and understand that we can make progress on this issue. Here's a brand new handout that I don't even have copies of to give you. You can download it from our website about climate change, 5G, and the Internet of Things. We will have many, many more devices, but we will have a 7-fold increase in demand for electricity if we keep going at the current pace. Smart is not necessarily intelligent nowadays. If we want to be intelligent, we have to stop pushing for everything to be wireless. The trees, the bees, the birds, they are all showing us that there can be damaging effects from this radiation.